They've been talking about this guy in Leopoldville in the Belgian Congo for ages. But if you study that, you realize that he probably had what's called LAV, which is lymphadenopathy-associated virus, which the French discovered at the Pasteur Institute. And each one of these stories, they come out with this big headline that's got like 1950s in it, and then you read the detail and it doesn't hold up. I mean, they're not even using the proper test to determine these things. So in the late 1990s, which is 3 years after I published my initial book, I was very interested to see a story that broke all across the newspapers and the media all around the world that said they had discovered the origin of HIV-1 in chimpanzees. And the first thing that catches my attention like that is that that's not the way a story is normally grows, okay? That usually means that somebody with a lot of power is releasing the story whenever you get it simultaneously like that.
Yes.
So I was very interested in this claim, and so I actually got the magazines and Time and those sorts of things, and I read this story, and it talked about this scientist at the University of Alabama. Her name was Beatrix Hahn, and she was the DNA specialist, and she held a press conference, very well attended, which said they had discovered HIV-1 in chimpanzee cells. Okay, very good. This happened to be 16 years after AIDS had shown up, and Harvard didn't catch this, Stanford didn't catch this, University of Chicago didn't catch this, National Cancer Institute didn't catch this. So why is this thing showing up here 16 years later at the University of Alabama? So I'm interested to find out where she got these chimpanzee cells from.
Mm-hmm.
And she says, well, a friend of mine sent them to me from Alamogordo, New Mexico.
Oh.
That's the White Sands missile base, okay? Yep. And I used to live in New Mexico, and I happen to be fairly familiar with the primate lab in Alamogordo. It was run by a fellow by the name of Fred Colson. And about a year before he died, Fred Colson gave an interview with a local health magazine or something, and he's very defensive of what he's done with the animals over the years, and he doesn't buy into all this PETA stuff and all that. So what happens is, Colson says in this interview I'm reading, that in 1982, the moment he heard about AIDS, he contacted people and said, I would like some of that blood so I can give it to my female chimpanzees to find out if this is passed between mother and child. Just so happens that the chimpanzee that Dr. Hahn's sample came from was a chimpanzee by the name of Marilyn, a female chimpanzee who died in Colson's laboratory 2 years later in 1984. And he had her cells cryovac, and they were in a freezer or refrigerator in his office. And when he died, they cleaned out the refrigerator, and they said, oh, here's some chimpanzee cells. Let's send them down to Beatrix Hahn. And that's how she gets her sample of the chimpanzee. It's from an essentially government-financed laboratory that had been doing experiments with AIDS for over 2 years before that chimpanzee died. So finding HIV-1 in a chimpanzee in a government laboratory, particularly a military one, proves absolutely nothing about the origin of AIDS. But it's a very convenient answer for those who want to make you think it came out of the jungles of Africa. So they finance her, and she's over in the jungle of Africa, and her people are picking up chimpanzee poo on the trails and analyzing them and all this other stuff. And they haven't found HIV-1 over there. They found the cousin of it, which we've known all along was the ancestor. Okay,
what's going on at Plum Island? Do you know?
No, I don't. I need to stick to what I know, and I don't know enough about that to talk about it on the radio.
All right. Well, let's take some calls here.
Okay.
Let's go to Texas City, Texas. Paulie, you're up with us on Coast to Coast. Hi, Paulie.
Yes, hi. My gosh, aren't you a little bit afraid, for your own safety, being, blowing the lid off of something that could, basically implicate just every phase and facet of any societal, standard? I mean, what I'm thinking is the possibility of maybe, perhaps rebuilding those cells, with nutrition or something. But do you know anything about any way that this could be taken care of?
Well, let me start with the fear part of that question. And I simply had to make a decision a long time ago whether I was going to talk about this in public or not. And I made the decision that the issue was too big. I mean, once I realized that we have a cancer epidemic today, and this is probably where it came from, that I made the decision that this was simply my job to do for America. I mean, some guys wound up on the beaches of Iwo Jima. I didn't do that. But this is my job. And I went past that go, no-go point back in the 1990s. And I will say I have not had a trace of trouble since then, but part of that is because of how I handle myself. On the what can we do about it issue, the best and maybe the only defense we have against any of this is our immune system.
Yes,
and
I would agree with that.
Take care of yourself.
Your father was a naval commander, wasn't he?
Yes.
Yeah, I spent 9 years in the Navy myself. And did this story, which, you got some exposure because of him and his work, were you driven because of, his work as a medical doctor?
I think that's a part of it, but I think it's a fairly small part.
Okay.
My personal contact with the story, I sat on Mary Sherman's lap as a child. Okay? I mean, this story is pretty close to me. I was not real anxious to get into such a dark story so close to my family. I mean, that to me, that was very nerve-wracking at the beginning of this. But one of the things is that my father's father was also a doctor, and he developed the original anthrax vaccine. And I have documents about that posted on my website. And one of the things he was very clear on, and my father communicated this to me, is the fact you're either a doctor or a soldier. You don't use medicine to kill. Okay? If you take that oath, that's it. And my father was very much in that camp. In fact, I think the reason that my father left the Navy, which was an organization that he thoroughly enjoyed being he was a commander at 29, George. Can you imagine what his career would have looked like after that?
Oh, my God. He would have been an admiral.
Of course. And so all of a sudden he comes home one day and tells my mother, I'm out of the Navy. And this is 1946, 47 when they weren't letting doctors out. So what went on? And we know that Navy was involved in all kind of nefarious bioweapon and chemical weapon research at the time. I think they just asked him to do something that he was unwilling to do because of the ethical thing. And so I will say that within my own family, there's a strong ethical tradition that says medicine is not used as a weapon. And so that's part of what I carry with me as I get on national radio and talk to people about this.
Lewistown, Montana. It's Ted's turn on Coast to Coast. Ted, go ahead.
Hi. Very interesting show tonight. I flew for airlines and Air Force for 32 years as a professional pilot. And once I moved over to the airline part of it, the Airline Pilots Association ran studies on the pilots. And, of course, back then most of us were men because that's just who got hired coming out of the various services. And they found that the airline pilots only got one kind of cancer more than average, and that was melanoma because of the very bright light up at altitude. But on all the other ones, the cancer rates were 0.008 of what the normal guy on the ground would get, down to 5 zeros and an 8 for the number 10 cancer, which indicates that the radiation at altitude was killing the pathogen, which I think he pointed out was probably a virus. And it's amazing to me that medicine can't figure that out and a bunch of people flying airplanes can. I just don't understand where medicine is going that they can't figure it out, unless it's just nothing more than a money-making proposition for the oncologists.
Well, I don't know. Ted, I think you've hit the nail on the head there. It's a very interesting comment that you've made about the airline study. And, I go back to Will Rogers, like we have the best government money can buy. The pharma industry, my father eventually resigned from the American Medical Association because he considered them a bunch of pill pushers for the pharma